I wasn't supposed to be home that evening. My original plan involved crashing at my friend Tyler's apartment, maybe ordering pizza, probably binge-watching some mindless series until my brain shut off from exhaustion. But Tyler texted last minute saying his girlfriend surprised him with anniversary plans. So there I was, stuck at home on a Friday night, sprawled across the living room couch in sweatpants and an old college hoodie, scrolling through my phone with zero motivation to do anything productive. That's when I heard the front door open. Dad's voice echoed through the hallway, followed by another voice, deeper, smoother, the kind that made you pay attention without even meaning to. I sat up instinctively, running a hand through my messy hair, suddenly aware of how completely unpresentable I looked. Dad walked in first, briefcase in one hand, that familiar tired smile on his face that he always wore after long workdays. But then he stepped aside and I saw him. Tall didn't even begin to describe it. The man practically filled the doorway, broad shoulders stretching the fabric of what had to be a custom-tailored charcoal suit. His jawline was sharp enough to cut glass, and when he turned his head slightly, I caught the way the evening light hit his profile. Strong nose, perfectly groomed dark hair with just a hint of silver at the temples, and eyes that were an unsettling shade of gray-blue. He looked like he'd walked straight out of some luxury watch commercial. All controlled power and expensive taste. "Liam," Dad said, gesturing toward me with obvious pride. "This is Blake Hartley, my new business partner. We finalized the merger today. Blake. This is my son. Liam, just finished his 3rd year at Berkeley." Blake's gaze shifted to me, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped and spiked simultaneously. His eyes traveled over me slowly, taking in every detail, and then his mouth curved into this slow, deliberate smile that made my stomach do something weird. "Nice to meet you, kid," he said, his voice carrying just enough warmth to seem polite but with an undertone that felt anything but innocent. Kid. The word lodged itself in my brain immediately. I was 21, not exactly a child, but the way he said it with that slight emphasis, that lingering eye contact, it felt less like a casual greeting and more like a challenge. Or maybe a claim. I forced myself to stand, extending my hand for a handshake, trying to ignore how clammy my palms suddenly felt. His hand enveloped mine, firm and warm, and he held it just a fraction longer than necessary, long enough for me to notice the calluses on his palm, the expensive watch on his wrist, the way his thumb brushed against my knuckles before he let go. "Good to meet you too," I managed, my voice coming out steadier than I felt inside. Dad clapped his hands together, breaking whatever strange tension had settled over the room. "I invited Blake to stay for dinner," Dad announced cheerfully. "He's new in town and I figured it'd be nice to have some company. Plus your cooking is way better than mine, Liam." "Great. Just great." I nodded, mumbling something about checking what we had in the kitchen, and practically fled the room. Behind me, I could hear Dad offering Blake a drink, their voices fading into easy conversation about stocks and market projections. I leaned against the kitchen counter, pressing my palms flat against the cool marble, willing my heart to slow down. What the hell was wrong with me? So the guy was attractive, so what? Plenty of people were attractive. It didn't mean anything. Except I couldn't shake the memory of those gray-blue eyes, the way they'd lingered on me like he was reading something I hadn't meant to show. Dinner was torture. Pure exquisite torture. I'd thrown together pasta with garlic bread. Nothing fancy, but Dad raved about it like I'd prepared a 5-star meal. Blake sat across from me, perfectly composed, discussing quarterly projections and expansion strategies with my father like they were old friends rather than brand new partners. He was professional, articulate, clearly brilliant in his field, but every few minutes when Dad's attention shifted to refill his wine glass, to grab his phone when it buzzed, to glance at the business documents he'd brought home, Blake's eyes would find me, and that smile. God, that smile. It wasn't obvious, nothing anyone else would notice, but I felt it like a physical touch. His gaze would drop to my mouth when I took a bite of pasta, linger on my hands when I reached for my water glass, track the movement of my throat when I swallowed. It was subtle, calculated, and absolutely maddening. "Liam, what are you studying at Berkeley?" Blake asked suddenly, leaning back in his chair with casual confidence. His voice cut through my spiraling thoughts, and I looked up to find both him and Dad watching me expectantly. "Business management," I answered, trying to sound normal like my brain wasn't currently short-circuiting. I'm thinking about specializing in international markets, maybe doing a semester abroad next year. Smart kid, Blake said. And there it was again, that word, spoken slowly enough that I couldn't tell if he was mocking me or something else entirely. International experience is crucial. I spent 2 years in Singapore early in my career. Changed everything for me. Dad jumped in with questions about Singapore, and Blake smoothly shifted the conversation. But his eyes never fully left me. I focused on my plate, pushing pasta around with my fork, hyper-aware of every movement I made. My knee bounced under the table, a nervous habit I couldn't control. At one point I reached for the breadbasket at the same moment Blake did, and our fingers brushed. It lasted maybe half a second, but I jerked my hand back like I'd been burned. Blake didn't react, just took a piece of bread and continued talking to Dad about office space and hiring logistics. But I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, like he was holding back a smirk. After dinner, Dad excused himself to show Blake the guest room. Apparently he was staying the night since his apartment wasn't ready yet. I cleared the table mechanically, loading the dishwasher with shaking hands, trying to process what I was feeling. Attraction obviously, but also something deeper and more unsettling. Like standing on the edge of a cliff knowing you shouldn't look down but unable to stop yourself. I retreated to my room as soon as the dishes were done, locking the door behind me and collapsing onto my bed. My heart was still racing, my mind replaying every look, every word, every accidental touch. Blake Hartley was my father's business partner, an older man, probably 15 years my senior at least. Successful, sophisticated, completely out of my league in every possible way. And yet when I closed my eyes, all I could see was that slow smile and those gray-blue eyes that seemed to promise something dangerous and irresistible. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house made me tense. Footsteps in the hallway, water running in the guest bathroom, the creak of floorboards. I kept imagining Blake on the other side of the wall, maybe thinking about me the way I was thinking about him. Or maybe not. Maybe I was reading too much into polite conversation and professional courtesy. But when morning came and I finally dragged myself out of bed exhausted and confused, one thing was clear. Blake Hartley had gotten under my skin in the span of a single evening, and something told me he knew it. The house was too quiet when I padded downstairs the next morning. Dad usually left for the office before sunrise. His company demanded early hours, especially with the new merger, which meant I'd hope to avoid Blake entirely. Maybe grab some coffee, retreat back to my room, wait until he left for wherever he needed to be. Simple plan, safe plan, except when I walked into the kitchen, Blake was already there. He stood near the coffee maker wearing just gray track pants that hung low on his hips and a fitted black t-shirt that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. The fabric stretched across his chest and shoulders in a way that made my mouth go dry. His hair was slightly damp, like he'd just showered, and I could smell his soap, something clean and masculine that mixed with the aroma of fresh coffee and made my head spin. "Morning, Liam," he said without turning around, like he'd known I was there before I'd even entered the room. His voice was rough with sleep, somehow even more attractive than it had been last night. I froze in the doorway, suddenly hyper-aware that I was wearing nothing but thin pajama pants and a tank top, my hair definitely sticking up in strange directions. "Morning," I mumbled, forcing myself to move toward the coffee maker. Maybe if I just focused on the coffee, grabbed a mug, and left quickly enough. "You're up early," Blake commented, finally turning to face me. His eyes did that same slow sweep they'd done last night, taking in every detail, and I felt exposed despite being fully clothed. "Your dad mentioned you usually sleep in on Saturdays." "Couldn't sleep," I admitted before I could stop myself. I reached for a mug from the cabinet, concentrating hard on the simple task, anything to avoid looking at him directly. "Any particular reason?" The question hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning I wasn't ready to acknowledge. I shrugged, pouring coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. Just one of those nights. Blake moved closer and suddenly he was right there, invading my space. One hand braced against the counter beside me. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. Close enough that I had to tilt my head up to see his face. "Where's your dad?" My back pressed against the counter. "Trapped." "Office," I managed, my voice coming out quieter than intended. He left around 6. So it's just us. Blake's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper, and those gray-blue eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Alone in this big house. No interruptions. Blake, I started, but I didn't know how to finish that sentence. What could I possibly say? Back off? Except I didn't want him to back off. Not really. Stop looking at me like that. But part of me craved those looks more than I wanted to admit. What? He prompted, one eyebrow raising slightly. His hand shifted on the counter, moving infinitesimally closer to where I stood. Tell me what you're thinking, Liam. I'm curious. I'm not. I swallowed hard, feeling the edge of the counter digging into my lower back. This isn't what? He leaned in slightly, and I caught another whiff of his soap, something woodsy and expensive that made my head fuzzy. Appropriate? Professional? Is that what you were going to say? Yes. No. I didn't know. My coffee mug sat forgotten on the counter beside me, cooling while this strange, charged moment stretched between us like a rubber band about to snap. Your dad told me you're shy, Blake continued, his voice taking on a conversational tone that completely contradicted how close he was standing. Said you keep to yourself, focus on school, don't date much. Is that true? Why does it matter? I shot back, finding a spark of defiance somewhere in my confusion. His smile widened. Because you don't strike me as shy, Liam. Nervous right now? Absolutely. But shy? He shook his head slowly. I don't think so. I think you're holding back because you know exactly what's happening here, and you're not sure if you should let it happen. The observation was too accurate, too close to the truth. I opened my mouth to deny it, to say something cutting that would end this conversation and restore some sense of normalcy, but my phone rang from somewhere in the living room where I'd left it last night. The sound shattered the moment like glass breaking. Blake stepped back immediately, that professional mask sliding into place so smoothly I almost wondered if I'd imagined the past few minutes. You should get that, he said easily, like he hadn't just been crowding me against the kitchen counter, saying things that made my pulse race. Might be important. I practically ran to the living room, grabbing my phone with shaking hands. Dad's name flashed on the screen. Hello? Liam, good you're awake. Dad's voice was brisk, already in work mode. Is Blake there? I need to talk to him about the contract revisions we discussed last night. Can you put him on? I turned to find Blake standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I held out the phone wordlessly. He walked over slowly, deliberately, and when he took the phone from my hand, his fingers brushed against mine. Just a brief touch, barely anything, but it sent electricity shooting up my arm. Richard, Blake said into the phone, his voice shifting completely into business mode. Professional, focused, like he was a completely different person. Yes, I was looking at those numbers. I think if we restructure the payment schedule. He wandered toward the windows as he talked, one hand gesturing as he explained something about quarterly earnings and risk assessment. But his eyes stayed on me the entire time, tracking my every movement as I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, watching him perform this perfect split between the professional businessman my father knew and the man who'd had me pinned against the kitchen counter minutes ago. The call lasted maybe 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. When Blake finally hung up and handed me back my phone, his expression was unreadable. Your dad's gonna be late tonight, he said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Some emergency meeting with the board. He asked if I could stay here another night since I still don't have furniture in my new place. He paused, letting that sink in. I told him it wasn't a problem. I hope that's okay with you. It wasn't a question. He knew it wasn't a question. Why would I have a problem with it? I said, trying to sound indifferent. It's Dad's house. He can invite whoever he wants. True. Blake moved closer again, and I resisted the urge to back up. But we both know this isn't about your dad's hospitality, is it? I don't know what you mean. You're a terrible liar. His voice was almost fond, like he found my denial amusing. It's actually kind of endearing. When you lie, your left eye twitches just slightly. Did you know that? I hadn't known that. I tried not to let that observation rattle me, but everything about this man rattled me. The way he moved, the way he talked, the way he seemed to see right through every defense I tried to put up. Look, I said, forcing myself to meet his eyes directly. I don't know what you think is happening here, but I think, Blake interrupted softly, that you felt something last night. Same as I did. I think you barely slept because you couldn't stop thinking about me. I think right now, part of you wants me to leave you alone. And another part, a bigger part, wants to see how far this goes. My throat felt too tight. You're my father's business partner. I am. This is completely inappropriate. Probably. So why? I gestured helplessly between us. Why are you doing this? Blake's expression softened slightly, something almost vulnerable flickering across his face before his usual confidence reasserted itself. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment I walked through that door yesterday. Because when I looked at you, something clicked into place that I wasn't expecting. He took one more step closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. And because I think you feel it too, even if you're not ready to admit it yet. I don't. My voice cracked embarrassingly. I can't. Then tell me to stop. His hand came up slowly, giving me plenty of time to move away, to object, to do anything. When I didn't, his palm cupped my jaw, thumb brushing against my cheekbone with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the intensity in his eyes. Tell me you don't feel anything, that I'm reading this completely wrong, and I'll back off. I'll be nothing but professional from this moment on. Just say the words. I should have said them, should have pushed him away, drawn clear boundaries, protected myself from whatever dangerous territory this was heading toward. But standing there with his hand warm against my skin, his eyes searching mine like I was something precious and complicated, he wanted to figure out. I couldn't make myself say anything at all. Blake's thumb traced along my jaw one more time. Then he dropped his hand and stepped back. That's what I thought, he said quietly. Don't worry, Liam. I'm patient. I can wait until you're ready to stop running from this. He walked away then, leaving me standing in the living room with my heart pounding and my mind spinning, wondering what the hell I'd just gotten myself into. I spent the rest of that Saturday avoiding Blake like my life depended on it. Which, in a way, it did, at least the life I'd carefully constructed. The one where I was a normal college student with normal problems and definitely not developing an extremely inappropriate attraction to my father's business partner. I barricaded myself in my room, pretending to study for upcoming exams while actually staring at the same textbook page for 45 minutes straight, unable to absorb a single word. Every sound from downstairs made me tense. Footsteps in the hallway, the television turning on, the coffee maker gurgling. I tracked Blake's movements through the house like prey monitoring a predator, hyper-aware of his presence even through walls and closed doors. Around 2 in the afternoon, I heard his footsteps pause outside my door. My breath caught, fingers freezing on my laptop keyboard. A soft knock. Liam? Blake's voice, muffled through the wood. I'm ordering lunch. Want anything? Not hungry, I called back, wincing at how obviously false that sounded. My stomach had been growling for the past hour. A pause. Then suit yourself. His footsteps retreated, and I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This was ridiculous. I was acting like a teenager with a crush instead of a grown adult capable of handling a simple interpersonal situation. So what if Blake was attractive? So what if he'd said some things that made my heart race? It didn't have to mean anything. I could just ignore it. Ignore him. Wait until Dad came home. Wait until Blake moved out. Wait until this weird tension dissolved into normal, professional distance. The plan sounded great in theory. By evening, hunger finally drove me out of my room. I crept downstairs like a burglar in my own house, relieved to find the living room empty. Blake's laptop sat open on the coffee table, abandoned, which meant he was probably in the guest room or maybe out somewhere. Perfect. I could grab some food, maybe watch some TV, reclaim a sense of normalcy. I just pulled open the refrigerator when I heard his voice behind me. Finally decided to emerge, I jumped, nearly dropping the leftover container I'd grabbed. Blake leaned against the kitchen doorway, arms crossed over his chest, looking unfairly good in jeans and a simple gray Henley. His expression was amused, like he knew exactly what I'd been doing all day and found it entertaining. I was studying, I said defensively, setting the container on the counter with more force than necessary. For 6 hours straight without eating? His eyebrow raised skeptically. That's either impressive dedication or impressive avoidance. Which is it? Does it matter? Not really. He pushed off the doorframe and walked closer, casual and unhurried. I was actually about to make dinner. Your dad called earlier, he won't be back until tomorrow morning. Emergency board meeting turned into a full strategy session. Blake's eyes met mine, something challenging in their depths. So it looks like it's just us again. All night. My throat went dry. I can order something. You don't have to cook. I want to. He moved past me to the stove, close enough that his arm brushed mine and started pulling out pans. Besides, we should talk. Clear the air a little. There's nothing to talk about. Blake laughed, low and genuinely amused. You're really committed to this denial thing, aren't you? He turned to face me fully, hip leaning against the counter in that infuriatingly casual way he had. Okay, let me make this easier. Yes, I'm attracted to you. Obviously, I'm not particularly subtle about it, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But that doesn't mean I'm going to do anything you don't want. I'm not some creep who can't take no for an answer. The direct approach threw me off balance. It's not about what I stopped, frustrated. You're my dad's partner. This whole situation is completely inappropriate. Agreed. His expression didn't change. Doesn't make it any less real though, does it? Why are you so calm about this? I burst out, surprising myself with the sudden anger. How are you just okay with wanting something you shouldn't have? Blake's smile faded slightly, replaced by something more serious. Who said I'm okay with it? He ran a hand through his hair, a crack appearing in that confident facade. You think I planned this? I came here to finalize a business deal, to start a new partnership with your father that could define the next decade of my career. Getting involved with his son was absolutely not part of the plan. Then why? Because I can't seem to help it. His voice was quieter now, almost frustrated. Because I looked at you yesterday and something just clicked, and I'm too old and too honest with myself to pretend it didn't happen. We stared at each other across the kitchen, the air thick with everything unsaid. Finally, I broke eye contact, looking down at my hands. This is a terrible idea, probably the worst I've ever had. Blake agreed. But that doesn't mean I'm going to stop wanting you. What am I supposed to do with that? My voice came out smaller than I intended, almost vulnerable. Whatever you want. Blake turned back to the stove, pulling out ingredients. You want me to leave you alone? I will. You want to pretend nothing's happening? I can do that too. But if you want to explore this thing between us, even just to see what it is, he glanced over his shoulder, eyes intense. Then I'm here. The choice is yours, Liam. It's always yours. The ball was in my court, and somehow that made everything more terrifying. If Blake had pushed, if he'd been aggressive or demanding, I could have pushed back, drawn clear lines, protected myself. But this giving me complete control while making it clear what he wanted, it left me floundering. I'm going to watch TV, I said finally, grabbing my leftover container and fleeing to the living room before he could respond. I sat on the couch, mechanically eating cold pasta while some sitcom played on the screen, not processing any of it. From the kitchen came the sounds of cooking knife on cutting board, water running, the sizzle of something hitting a hot pan, domestic sounds that shouldn't have been as affecting as they were. 20 minutes later, Blake appeared with 2 plates of what looked like professionally prepared salmon with roasted vegetables. He set one on the coffee table in front of me without comment, then settled into the armchair, notably not the couch beside me, with his own plate. You didn't have to, I said, eyeing the food. I know. We ate in silence, the TV filling the space between us with laugh tracks and commercial jingles. It should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. It was almost comfortable. Like we'd done this 100 times before. When the episode ended, Blake spoke without looking at me. For what it's worth, I'm not going anywhere. Your dad and I have contracts, shared investments. I'm going to be around a lot over the next few months. Probably longer, so we might as well figure out how to coexist peacefully. Is that what we're doing? I asked, finally turning to look at him. Coexisting peacefully? His eyes met mine and that slow smile appeared again. The one that made my stomach flip. That's up to you, kid. We can be whatever you want us to be. There it was again. Kid. The word that shouldn't have affected me but somehow did. Every single time. I looked away first, focusing back on the TV, but I could feel his gaze lingering on me for several more seconds before he too turned his attention to the screen. The rest of the evening passed in that strange, charged quiet. Blake kept his distance physically, stayed in the armchair while I occupied the couch. But the awareness never faded. I felt every shift of his body, every time he laughed at something on TV, every moment his attention drifted from the screen to me. Around 11, I couldn't take it anymore. "I'm going to bed," I announced, standing abruptly. "Good night, Liam." Blake's voice was neutral, polite, but when I glanced back, his eyes were dark with something unspoken. I practically ran up the stairs, locking myself in my room and leaning against the door like I'd escaped something dangerous. My heart pounded as I got ready for bed, brushing my teeth while replaying the entire day in my head. Blake's words kept circling. "The choice is yours." But that was the problem, wasn't it? Because if the choice was really mine, if I was being completely honest with myself about what I wanted, I wasn't sure I'd make the right one. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard Blake's footsteps in the hallway. They paused outside my door, just for a moment, barely long enough to notice, then continued to the guest room. A door closed softly, and I lay there in the dark, wondering how long I could keep running from something that felt increasingly inevitable, and whether I even wanted to run at all. Dad came home the next morning while I was still in bed, pretending to be asleep even though I'd been awake for hours. I heard his voice downstairs, tired but energized the way he always sounded after closing a big deal. Then Blake's voice joined his smooth, professional, like the past 48 hours hadn't happened at all. When I finally forced myself downstairs, they were at the breakfast table, coffee cups and scattered business documents between them. Blake looked up as I entered, and for just a split second something heated flashed in his eyes before that professional mask clicked into place. "Morning, son," Dad said, glancing up from his tablet. "You look exhausted. Late night studying?" "Something like that." I grabbed a mug from the cabinet, hyper-aware of Blake watching my every movement. When I turned around, he was focused on his phone, but I caught the slight curve at the corner of his mouth. "Liam seemed a bit under the weather yesterday," Blake said casually, looking up with perfectly feigned concern. "I hope you're feeling better this morning." The audacity. I met his eyes briefly. "Much better, thanks." Dad nodded, already distracted by whatever was on his screen. Good. Listen, I've got news." The Singapore office confirmed the expansion timeline. "Blake and I will be working closely on this over the next few weeks." He looked between us with obvious satisfaction. "Blake's going to be around quite a bit. Hope you don't mind the company, Liam." My stomach dropped. Weeks. Blake would be here for weeks, in close proximity, acting like nothing had shifted between us while I struggled to maintain any semblance of normalcy. I forced a smile. "Of course not." "Actually," Blake interjected, setting down his coffee cup, "I had a thought. Liam's studying business management, right? Maybe he could shadow us occasionally, get some real-world experience before he graduates." He looked at me with those gray-blue eyes, completely innocent. "If you're interested, of course." Dad's face lit up. "That's a fantastic idea. What do you think, Liam? Could be great for your resume." What could I say? No, I can't be around Blake. Because he makes me lose my mind? Sure. That sounds educational. Blake's smile widened just slightly. "Perfect. We have a client meeting tomorrow afternoon. I'll pick you up around 1. The rest of breakfast passed in a blur of business talk that I couldn't focus on. Blake and Dad discussed market projections and strategic partnerships, while I pushed scrambled eggs around my plate, trying not to stare at Blake's hands as he gestured, remembering how they'd felt against my skin. When Dad excused himself to take a call in his office, Blake stood and carried his plate to the sink. As he passed behind my chair, his hand brushed against my shoulder, barely a touch, over in a heartbeat, but it sent electricity racing down my spine. "Tomorrow," he murmured, too quiet for Dad to hear from the other room. "Don't wear that cologne you had on yesterday. It's distracting." Then he was gone, leaving me sitting there with my heart pounding and my mind racing. The next day arrived too quickly. I spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing what to wear, changing 3 times before settling on dark slacks and a button-down that wasn't too formal but wasn't too casual either. No cologne as instructed, though I hated that I'd followed that instruction. Blake arrived exactly at 1, pulling up in a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than my college tuition. I climbed into the passenger seat, immediately enveloped by leather and that clean, masculine scent that was just Blake. No cologne needed. "Ready?" he asked, glancing over as he put the car in drive. "For a business meeting?" "Sure." He smiled, pulling away from the curb. "You look nice. Professional. Thanks." I stared out the window, watching the neighborhood slide past. "Where exactly are we going?" "Downtown. Meeting with potential investors for the Singapore expansion." He turned onto the main road, one hand relaxed on the steering wheel. "Shouldn't take more than an hour. Then I thought we could grab dinner somewhere. Discuss what you learned. Dad's expecting me home for dinner." I already texted him. Said we might run late. Blake glanced at me briefly before returning his attention to the road. He's fine with it. Of course he was. Dad trusted Blake completely. If only he knew. We'd driven maybe 10 minutes when Blake suddenly turned down a quiet side street and pulled over, parking beneath a sprawling oak tree that cast dappled shadows across the windshield. My pulse immediately kicked up. "What are you doing?" Blake shifted in his seat to face me fully, one arm draped over the steering wheel. "We need to talk about what's happening here. I thought we were going to a meeting." "We are. In 30 minutes. His eyes searched my face, intense and focused in a way that made it hard to breathe. "But first I need to know where you stand. Because this, whatever this is, it's not going away. And I can't keep pretending in front of your father if I don't know what you want." My throat felt tight. "What I want doesn't matter. This is impossible." "That's not an answer." Blake's voice was soft but firm. "Tell me you feel nothing and I'll stop. We'll keep this purely professional from now on. But if you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling..." He paused, jaw tightening. "Then we need to figure out what we're doing." "Blake, I want to kiss you," he said bluntly, cutting through my deflection. "Right now, in this car. I want to pull you closer and kiss you until neither of us can think straight. But I won't do that unless you tell me it's what you want to." The confession hung between us, raw and honest. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was real. This was happening. And if I said yes, if I admitted what I'd been denying for days, there would be no going back. Blake reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and placed his hand on my thigh. Not moving, not gripping, just resting there, warm and solid through the fabric of my slacks. "One word, Liam. Yes or no. That's all I need." I couldn't speak. If I said yes, everything changed. If I said no, I'd be lying, and we both knew it. So I just stared at him, caught between want and fear, frozen in indecision. After a long moment, Blake removed his hand and straightened in his seat. "Your silence tells me you're not ready." His voice was gentle, not accusing. "That's okay. I can wait." He started the car again, pulling back onto the street like nothing had happened. But my entire body still felt the ghost of his touch, the weight of his hand, the heat of his gaze. We drove the rest of the way to downtown in silence, and I spent every minute trying to convince myself that keeping quiet had been the right choice. The meeting was exactly as boring as expected, men in expensive suits talking about profit margins and risk assessment. But I couldn't focus on any of it. Every time Blake spoke, I watched his mouth. Every time he gestured toward the presentation screen, I tracked the movement of his hands. And once, when he stood to point out something on a chart, he passed behind my chair and his fingers trailed across my shoulders so briefly I might have imagined it. Except I didn't imagine the way my breath caught, or the way Blake's eyes met mine for just a second before he continued speaking, perfectly professional. On the drive back, he finally broke the silence. "You did well in there. Paid attention, asked intelligent questions." "Thanks, Liam." Blake's voice changed, dropping into something more serious. "I meant what I said earlier, about waiting, but I also need you to understand something." He paused at a red light, turning to look at me fully. "This isn't just physical attraction. I don't know how to explain it, but when I look at you, I see something I didn't even know I was searching for. And that terrifies me as much as it probably terrifies you." The light turned green, but he held my gaze for another heartbeat before accelerating. "So take your time, figure out what you want. But know that whatever you decide, I'm not going anywhere. Your father and I have built something that's going to last years, which means you and I," he smiled slightly, "we're going to have to learn how to navigate this, one way or another. We pulled into my driveway just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Before I could open my door, Blake reached over and caught my wrist gently. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I think you're braver than you give yourself credit for. Being honest about feeling scared, that takes courage." Then he released me and I climbed out of the car on shaking legs, watching him drive away and wondering how much longer I could keep running from something that felt increasingly inevitable. A week later, Dad left for a 3-day business trip to Seattle. He'd been talking about it for days. Important clients, crucial presentations, couldn't be postponed. What he didn't mention until the morning he left was that Blake would be staying at the house while he was gone. "Just to keep an eye on things," Dad said, tossing his overnight bag into his car trunk. "You know how I worry about you being here alone." I was 21 years old. I'd lived alone in dorms for 3 years. But I didn't argue, just nodded and waved as Dad pulled out of the driveway, then turned to find Blake standing in the doorway with 2 grocery bags. "Thought I'd cook tonight," he said casually. "Unless you have other plans?" "No plans." "Good." He moved past me into the kitchen, and I caught that now familiar scent that made my head spin. "How do you feel about risotto?" The day passed in careful normalcy. Blake worked in the living room, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear for what seemed like hours. I tried to study upstairs but kept finding excuses to wander downstairs. Water, snacks, checking the mail. Each time, Blake would glance up, a knowing smile playing at his lips. But he never called me out on it. By evening, tension had built to an almost unbearable level. I helped Blake in the kitchen, chopping vegetables while he stirred risotto, and every time we reached for the same utensil or accidentally brushed against each other, I felt sparks along my skin. We ate at the dining table, sitting across from each other in loaded silence. The risotto was perfect, creamy and rich with just the right amount of bite, but I barely tasted it. All my attention was focused on Blake, on the way his forearms flexed as he cut into his food, the way his throat moved when he drank wine, the way his eyes kept finding mine across the table. Finally, he set down his fork with deliberate care. "We can't keep doing this." "Doing what?" My voice came out rougher than intended. "Pretending." Blake leaned back in his chair, studying me with an intensity that made me want to squirm. "Dancing around what's happening between us. I told you I could wait, and I meant it. But Liam," he ran a hand through his hair and for the first time he looked uncertain. "I need to know if I'm waiting for something that's never going to happen." I set down my own fork, hands trembling slightly. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth." He stood abruptly, moving around the table until he was standing beside my chair. "Stop hiding from this. From me. From yourself." "I'm not hiding," I protested, but it sounded weak even to my own ears. Blake knelt down, putting himself at my eye level in a gesture that felt simultaneously vulnerable and intensely intimate. "Yes, you are. And I understand why. This is complicated and messy and probably a terrible idea. But that doesn't change what I feel." He reached for my hand, holding it gently. "So I'm asking you straight out, do you want this? Want me?" My chest felt too tight, emotions I'd been suppressing for over a week threatening to overflow. "I'm scared," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "Scared that if I let you in, I won't be able to protect myself. Scared of what it means that I want someone I shouldn't want. Scared that you'll realize I'm not worth all this complication." Blake's expression softened completely. His free hand came up to cup my face, thumb brushing my cheekbone. "Listen to me very carefully. You are not weak for being scared. You're human. And everything you're feeling, I'm feeling it too." He paused, searching my eyes. "But I also know that what I feel for you is real. Strong enough that I'm willing to face whatever consequences come from this." "Dad will never forgive us," I whispered. "Maybe not at first, but your father loves you more than anything. Eventually he'll understand." Blake's thumb continued its gentle movement against my cheek. "I'm not asking you to figure everything out right now. I'm just asking for a chance. Let me show you that this could be something good, something worth the risk." Tears pricked at my eyes, frustration, fear, relief all mixing together. "I don't know how to do this." "Then let me teach you." His voice was barely above a whisper now. "Trust me enough to try." I looked into his eyes, those gray-blue depths that had haunted me since the moment we met. and made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I nodded just once, but it was enough. Blake's entire expression transformed. "Say it," he urged softly. "I need to hear you say it." "Yes." My voice was shaky but clear. "I want this. I want you." The last word barely left my mouth before Blake closed the distance between us, his lips capturing mine in a kiss that was everything I'd imagined, and nothing like I'd expected. Soft at first, gentle, like he was afraid I might shatter. But when I leaned into it, when my hands came up to grip his shoulders, the kiss deepened into something more urgent. Blake's hands framed my face, holding me like I was precious, like I was something worth protecting. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead against mine. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "No," I answered and realized I meant it. "No regrets." He pulled me up from the chair, leading me to the couch in the living room. We settled there together, Blake pulling me against his chest, one arm wrapped securely around my waist. His heartbeat was strong and steady under my ear, grounding me in the reality of this moment. "We'll take this slow," Blake murmured into my hair. "At your pace. I'm not going to rush you into anything you're not ready for." I tilted my head up to look at him. "What happens when Dad gets back?" "We'll be careful. Discreet." His arm tightened around me. "But Liam, I need you to understand. I'm not keeping you a secret forever. When the time is right, when we're both ready, we're telling him together. And if he reacts badly, then we'll deal with it. Together." Blake pressed a kiss to my forehead. "You're not alone in this. Whatever happens, we face it side by side." I settled back against his chest, letting myself relax into his embrace for the first time since this all began. "Blake? Thank you. For being patient. For not giving up on this." His laugh rumbled through his chest. "Thank you for taking a chance on me. On us." He shifted slightly, tilting my chin up so he could look into my eyes. "I know I said this before, but I need you to really hear it. What I feel for you isn't casual. It's not just physical. I'm falling for you, Liam. Hard and fast, and it scares the hell out of me, but I wouldn't change it." My breath caught. "I feel it too," I admitted softly. "I've been trying not to, but I can't help it." Blake kissed me again, slower this time, deeper, full of promise. When we separated, he pulled a blanket over both of us, tucking me more securely against his side. We stayed like that for hours, talking quietly about everything and nothing. His childhood in Boston, my plans after graduation, favorite books and movies, and completely meaningless things that somehow felt incredibly important. As the night deepened around us, I felt something settle in my chest. Peace. Certainty. The knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, this us was worth fighting for. Eventually, Blake insisted I should try to sleep, that we both needed rest. But even as I drifted off against his shoulder, his arm still holding me close, I knew everything had changed. We'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross, made a choice we couldn't unmake, and I didn't want to. The next 4 weeks existed in a strange duality. During the day, Blake and I were perfectly appropriate. Him the business partner, me the college student shadowing them occasionally. But at night, after Dad went to bed, Blake would slip into my room and we'd exist in our own private world where nothing mattered except each other. He kept his promise. We took things slowly, carefully, learning each other by degrees. Every touch was deliberate, every kiss meaningful. Blake never pushed for more than I was ready to give, content to just hold me, talk to me, let me get used to the weight of this secret between us. But the guilt was there too, lurking beneath every stolen moment. Every time Dad smiled at us over dinner, every time he praised Blake's business acumen or talked about their expanding partnership, I felt the weight of our deception pressing down on my chest. One evening, about a month into our secret relationship, we were all having dinner when Dad casually dropped a bomb. "Liam, I've been meaning to mention this. Remember Marcus Holloway from the firm? His daughter just moved back to the city after finishing graduate school." Dad smiled, that well-meaning smile that immediately set off alarm bells. "She's a lovely girl. Smart, ambitious. I thought maybe you two could meet for coffee sometime." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Across the table, Blake's jaw visibly tightened, though he kept his expression neutral. "Dad, I don't really—" "No pressure," Dad interrupted cheerfully. "Just think about it. She'll be at the charity gala next week. You're coming to that, right? Perfect opportunity to say hello at least. Blake excused himself shortly after, claiming he had calls to make. I found him later in the guest room, standing by the window with his arms crossed, radiating tension. Blake? Don't. He turned to face me and the jealousy in his eyes was raw and unmistakable. Don't tell me it's no big deal or that you have to go through with it to keep up appearances. I wasn't going to say that. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it. I was going to say that I'll figure out how to avoid it. Or I'll meet her once and add it clear I'm not interested. And what reason will you give? Blake's voice was sharp. That you're already involved with someone. Oh wait, you can't say that because the person you're involved with is your father's business partner and we're hiding like we're doing something shameful. The accusation stung because it held truth. We agreed to be careful. I know what we agreed. He ran both hands through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. And I understand why. But seeing you across that table while your father tries to set you with some woman, knowing I can't say a damn thing, he laughed bitterly. It's harder than I thought it would be. I crossed the room to him, placing my hands on his chest. I don't want to meet her. I don't want anyone else. You know that. Do I? Blake's hands came up to grip my wrists, not hard but firmly. Because from where I'm standing it feels like you're ashamed of this, of us. That's not fair. Isn't it? His eyes searched mine. We've been doing this for a month, Liam. Hiding, sneaking around, pretending during the day and only being real at night. How much longer are we supposed to live like this? Until the time is right. When is that? Blake interrupted. When your dad finds out on his own. When someone sees us and tells him. When it all explodes because we waited too long. I pulled my hands free, stepping back. So what do you want me to do? March downstairs right now and announce it over dessert? That'll go over great. I want you to stop running. Blake's voice rose, then dropped back down as he visibly tried to control his temper. I want you to admit that maybe there's never going to be a perfect time and we just have to rip off the band-aid and deal with the consequences. Easy for you to say. He's not your father. The words hung between us, sharp and hurtful. Blake's expression shuddered, something wounded flickering across his face before he locked it down. You're right, he said quietly. He's not. But I'm the one risking a business partnership I've spent years building. I'm the one who stands to lose professional credibility, clients, reputation. So don't act like I'm not sacrificing anything here. Shame flooded through me. Blake, I didn't mean. I need some space. He cut me off, moving toward the door. We'll talk tomorrow. He left me standing there, feeling like the worst person in the world. The next few days were tense. Blake was polite but distant, maintaining professional boundaries even when Dad wasn't around. I hated it. Hated the careful distance, the way he avoided being alone with me, the absence of those stolen moments that had become my lifeline. The charity gala arrived too quickly. I wore a suit, hating every moment of it, and endured meeting Caroline Holloway, who was admittedly perfectly nice. Pretty smart, exactly the kind of person my father would want me to date. But every polite conversation felt like betrayal, especially knowing Blake was somewhere in the same ballroom watching. I found him later on the balcony, nursing a drink and staring out at the city lights. She seems nice, I said quietly, joining him at the railing. I'm sure she is. Blake didn't look at me. Your father looked pleased that you two were getting along. I told her I wasn't interested. The confession came out rushed. She asked for my number and I said I was focused on school, not looking to date anyone right now. Dad tried to insist, but I shut it down. That got Blake's attention. He turned to face me, surprise evident. You did? Of course I did. I moved closer, lowering my voice. I told you I don't want anyone else. That hasn't changed just because we had a fight. Some of the tension left Blake's shoulders. We did have a fight, didn't we? Our first real one. Hopefully our last. I risked touching his hand briefly, hidden behind the stone balustrade. I'm sorry. For what I said. For making you feel like your sacrifices don't matter. They do. You do. Blake's fingers curled around mine for just a moment before letting go. I'm sorry too, for pushing, for letting jealousy make me say things I didn't mean. He paused, finally meeting my eyes. But Liam, I meant what I said about not wanting to hide forever. At some point, we have to be brave enough to face this head on. I know. And I did. The past few days of distance had shown me how much I needed him, how empty everything felt without his presence. I'll tell him. Soon. I just need to find the right moment. Okay. Blake nodded slowly. But if you can't find that moment in the next month, I'm finding it for you. Deal? It was an ultimatum. Gentle but firm. And honestly, I needed it. Deal. We couldn't stay out there together without raising suspicion, so Blake went back inside first. I followed a few minutes later, scanning the crowd until I found Dad talking to a group of investors. He looked happy, successful, proud of the empire he'd built, and I was about to tear his world apart by admitting I'd fallen in love with his business partner. The thought terrified me. But as I watched Blake from across the room, saw him glance over with that look that was meant only for me, I knew we couldn't keep living in the shadows. Whatever happened when the truth came out, we'd face it together, just like he'd promised.